Welcome to the Sofia Corset Instructional. We will be going over how to make this PDF pattern. It is available for purchase and download, so you can make this at home for yourself. There are a couple different variations you can choose from. You can do the cups, you can do the hip pieces, or you can do lace. I have made all of them and I adore every single one of these corsets. As always, don't hesitate to ask me any questions if you have any, and let's get started. First things first, we're going to cut out all of our fabric pieces on both our main fabric and our lining fabric. You can see here I have my cup, my center, my side front, my side back, my center back, and a front hip and a back hip. Now that everything's cut out, we are going to use a light to mid-weight interfacing. We're going to iron that onto our main fabric to give it some sturdiness. Once all of my pieces have their interfacing, we will start pinning and sewing. I like to go side by side. This helps even everything out. Also, we will leave the cups until the very end. But what I'm going to start off with is I'm going to take my center front and pin it with my side front, matching up the notches that were on the pattern. You can barely see my notches, but they are on there. Once that's pinned, I'm going to sew into place. Now I'm just going to go down the line with my pattern pieces. I'm taking my front side to my back side, aligning them right sides together, pinning and sewing. Once again, going down the line, I am taking my side back to my center back, pinning and sewing with the right sides facing to complete that side of the corset. Once this side is done, I'm going to get started on my hip pieces. This part is optional, so if you want to skip this, you can go ahead and fast forward. But we are going to take our hip pieces and take our front to the back with right sides facing, align at that side seam, and sew. Now that my two hip pieces are connected, I'm flipping this to the right side of my corset, and then I'm going to match up all my seams. Also, I'm doing the front to the front, making sure I have the right side to the right side as I attach this. And I'm going to slowly pin all of this the correct way. And I'm going to match up all my seams, as in that center seam of my hip pieces is going to my side seam of my corset. This takes a little bit of finessing, so take your time, use as many pins as you need to really get this to all match up, because they're curves and it can be a little bit difficult. And then once you have everything pinned in place, you're going to sew your hip piece down. Once our hip pieces are connected, we are going to repeat those exact same steps for the opposite side. I have my two sides of corset complete. I do it this way so that way I'm never getting too off, and it just makes it a little bit more even. And so now I'm going to go right sides together, pin my center pieces, and sew down. Now that my corset is all sewn together, I am going to press those seams flat. I'm not pressing my hip pieces, as you can see. We're going to do something different for that, but all of the other seams we are going to press flat. When it comes to our hips, if you have the hips, you're going to trim that down, leaving a little bit of seam allowance, just enough to cut little snips into these. This will help it sit super flat since it is a curve. You're going to do this on both sides of your corset. Then I'm going in and using a tailoring ham. I'm just making sure everything is pressed really flat and all my seams look extra nice. And as you can see, we have an almost complete corset. We are going to follow all of those steps, the exact same steps, with our lining that you can see I have here. And now I'm just going to press my lining just like we did our main fabric. Now we'll begin with our cup pieces. The cup pieces are optional, so you can leave these out. Or if you are doing a lace, you do not need to worry about a lining. You'll just sew your lace onto your corset. If you're doing cups and you need a lining, you're going to take your lining piece and match it with your main fabric, right sides together, pin from one side to the other side all the way along the top, leaving only the bottom raw. Repeat this for your second cup, and then once everything is pinned, you will sew it into place. Once everything is sewn down, it will look like this. You're just going to trim off those edges. I like to do the corners at a diagonal. This just helps it sit super flat. Once that's done, you are going to flip this inside out, press it lightly, and then option, you can use a top stitch to make it even flatter. Now I'm going to start putting in my cups. You can see I have a mark. That is where my notches were from my pattern. That notch is going to match up with the center and front side seam for each corresponding side. I'm going to match those up and then place my cup facing down with right sides together, pin and sew. This is the exact same instructions if you are doing the lace cups. Again, if you're not doing any cups, you can keep fast forwarding a bit, but it is the same for the lace. As I do my second cup, I'm gonna make sure that they're really even and that both of my cups look the same. Once I have this pinned how I want, I am just going to base stitch down the very top so my cups are attached to my corset. Finally, your corset should start to look like this. We are going to attach our lining, and while we attach this, we're still gonna make sure those cups are facing down. We don't want them up, we want them facing down. They'll flip up once we've attached everything. So I'm going to take my lining and face it right sides together with my main corset fabric. I'm gonna pin all the way from one side to the top, all the way to the other side, and I'm just going and I'm matching up all my seams right now. I will do this first and then I will go in and fill everything else in with pins. You wanna make sure that all of your seams are matching up and that your lining is really perfect with your main corset fabric so that it looks nice and neat. Now that I have all of this pinned in place, I'm just gonna sew these two together. Once I'm done sewing my lining to my main fabric, I'm going to trim off a lot of that seam allowance. When I get to the front curves, I'm going to add little snips so that way this helps it lay super flat when we turn it inside out. Now you're just gonna turn your corset inside out. I'm using a blunt tip for those very tip top parts. Make sure you're using something blunt. I think I just have a marker cap to do that. Once it's all inside out, I am going to lightly press it into place, making sure it looks good, and then I'm going to take a top stitch and top stitch down the entire sides and the top of my corset. Now we are going to start sewing down our lines to make our boning channels. There's going to be 5 boning channels in the front and then 2 on the back for our grommets. Screenshot this if you want to refer back to it. This will show you all the lines that need to be marked down and then sewn, and it helps to have an image to look at before I kind of explain it. All of the lines we're drawing that we are going to sew down are going to be 0.5 inches from each other, and I'm starting from the center seam, so I'm going 0.25 inches to the left and then 0.25 inches to the right, and then drawing my line all the way down. I'm drawing it all the way down for the center. When we get to the other ones, I'm going to draw down until I get to the hip. Once I've marked both the lines for my center channel, I am going over to the seam line that is from my center front to my side front, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to sandwich it in between 2 lines, going 0.25 inches to the right and 0.25 inches to the left. Now I'm going to do 2 lines that are following the tip top part of that corset, so it's going straight down from that parallel to all of my other lines, and I'm just going to make sure it is at least 0.5. I want to be able to fit my boning up into that top point so that it stands super straight. Now I'm going to repeat all of those lines that I just drew on the opposite side, then I'm going to get started on the back. This back boning is to support your grommets. If you're deciding to do a zipper closure, which you can do, it does work with this pattern. You do not need to do this one, but this instructional video is for the grommets. So in that case, 0.5 inches from where your top stitch is where you're going to draw the line, and then repeat that on both sides for your back channels. Now that we have everything properly marked, we are just going to sew straight down right on all of our markings. Again, not going into the hip pieces, just following our lines and sewing straight. And finally, it is time to enter in our boning. I am using a plastic boning that is 1/4 inch. You can use whatever you like. First, we are going to measure each channel, and we're going to do this 1/2 inch short so we have room for the end before we enter in our boning. Before you enter in your boning, it is always a good practice to either tape off your ends or you can melt them. If you're using steel cage boning, you can use the caps. Before you enter it in, this will help it not to poke through. You know, when you get boning and it pokes through your corset, we don't want that. So make sure you're burning it off or capping it or taping it, whatever method you prefer, before you enter it into your channel, and do this for all of your boning channels. Now we've really got a corset that has our structure. To make sure that those bones don't pop out of some of our channels, we are going to close up the ones by the hips to make sure that that boning can't come through the end, but only the ones through the hips. Getting to the home stretch, I'm doing a bias tape finish. If you don't want to do a bias tape finish, you can actually just hem your corset, but if you'd like to do the bias tape, the first thing I start with is base stitching my main fabric to my lining, and then I start making my bias tape, or you can buy a bias tape that matches your corset. Either way, once you have your bias tape ready, this is the inside of my corset. I'm going to take the end, which is a raw edge of my bias tape, fold it over once, and then match up the raw edge of my corset to the raw edge of my bias tape with right sides facing. I'm going to pin this into place, and you'll see I use a ton of pins. You can use as many as you want, and I'm going to sew this down. Again, these are right sides facing, and it will look like this once you're done. After that's sewn into place, I am just going to trim up that edge so that it looks a little bit flatter after I fold it over. And now that that is trimmed, we are going to take that, and my corset is on the right side, we are going to fold it over once and then fold it over again, concealing the raw edge of the bias tape. So when you're done, it won't be any raw edges showing. It'll be folded in on itself. It will look like this. Again, use as many pins as you need. I use a ton to really secure this in place and make sure that my bias tape looks good before I go in and sew everything down. Once my bias tape is all sewn down and ready, I'm going to give it a light press so it looks nice and neat, and we're going to get started on our grommets. I'm using a 1/4 inch grommets, and I am starting my grommet markings 0.5 inches from the top, and then I am going down 1 inch in between each grommet until I get to the end. There will be a small space at the end, but I kind of want that opening, and I'm going to make sure that when I do this on both sides, it is completely even before I start cutting holes or putting in my grommets. Another thing you want to make sure of when you're doing your grommets is make sure it is really close to that boning channel. This helps give you the support in the back. Once I have everything marked and ready, I am just going to insert in my grommets. I'm using a grommet press. If you don't have one of these, that's okay. You can use a grommet kit and a hammer. Now, I didn't film this last step, but it's pretty easy. You are just going to lace up your corset and you are done. I hope you enjoy your new custom corset that you made for yourself. Please let me know if you have any more questions and follow along if you want to see new patterns in the future.